Hollywood has always been a master of illusion. It builds legends, crafts desire, and tells the world who is worthy of being remembered. But beneath the red carpets and flashing lights, there's a darker story of stars who were hidden, voices that were silenced, and lives that were rewritten to fit a script they never chose. This video is about them. 5 LGBTQ+ men whose beauty, brilliance, and bravery once graced the silver screen, but whose names have been left out of the spotlight for far too long, not because they lacked talent, but because they loved differently and dared to exist in a time that demanded they disappear. We're here to bring them back, and if you want to go even deeper, Rainbow Spotlight just launched members-only access. Join today for early access, exclusive content, and the behind-the-scenes truths that history books refuse to print. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. We're building a global archive of queer memory together. Let's begin. Montgomery Clift, The Beautiful Tragedy. Hollywood couldn't hide. He had the face of an angel and the soul of a storm. Montgomery Clift wasn't just a movie star. He was a revolution. In an era dominated by rugged, hyper-masculine leading men, Monty brought something entirely new to the screen: vulnerability, sensitivity, that aching, unspoken emotion behind the eyes. He was a method actor before the term had fully entered Hollywood vocabulary. His performances in A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and The Misfits weren't just acclaimed, they were transformative. He didn't act, he felt. And through the camera lens, audiences felt with him. But behind that haunting beauty was a man who never truly found peace. Montgomery Clift was gay, bisexual by some accounts, entirely queer in his desire, his energy, his defiance of masculine norms. And in the 1950s Hollywood, that was not only taboo, it was dangerous. He lived under constant pressure to perform off-screen too. Studio heads arranged dates with women. Gossip columns whispered, then screamed. Monty never addressed it publicly, he never could. Still, those close to him knew. He fell in love with men. He drank to numb the conflict. He wrote poems filled with longing and self-hatred. He once said, "I wake up feeling like a young man, with an old man's regrets." Then came the crash. In 1956, Monty left a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house. Minutes later, his car hit a telephone pole. His face, his most valuable commodity, was shattered. The studio rushed to cover it up, but something deeper broke that night. Though he returned to acting, something had changed. His performances were still brilliant, but darker, more withdrawn, like he wasn't just playing pain, he was drowning in it. The press labeled him Hollywood's slowest suicide. He lived in near isolation, struggling with addiction, mental health, and the weight of a secret he never got to release. In 1966, at just 45 years old, Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack in his New York apartment, alone, unmarried. His phone record showed no outgoing calls in the last week of his life. But what he left behind was more than sadness. It was truth. In an age of masks, Monty let emotion pour through every frame he touched. He showed generations of queer people that being soft, sensitive, and shattered didn't make you weak. It made you real. And maybe that's why, decades later, he still lingers in our minds, not just as a tragic figure, but as a mirror. A reminder of how much beauty can live inside the broken. Drop a 1 if Montgomery Clift's story shook something in you, and if you've ever felt the need to hide what hurt you most. Ramon Novarro, the silent heartthrob. Hollywood tried to silence forever before Brad Pitt, before George Clooney. There was Ramon Novarro. In the 1920s, he wasn't just a movie star, he was the movie star. A dark-haired, Mexican-born heartthrob whose face lit up the silent screen with mystery and magnetism. Women swooned, studios celebrated. And when he starred in Ben-Hur, 1925, he became one of the highest-paid actors in the world. But behind the glamour, Ramon was hiding something far more dangerous than a scandal: his truth. Novarro was gay, and in the golden age of Hollywood, that wasn't just frowned upon, it was a career death sentence. So he did what many had to do. He played the part. The studios arranged fake dates. Magazines pushed headlines of romantic entanglements with starlets. But the real Ramon lived quietly, cautiously, falling in love in the shadows. He was known to host intimate dinner parties at his home, a sanctuary where he could be himself, surrounded by friends, artists, and lovers. But even there, he was haunted by the ever-present fear of exposure. His Catholic upbringing only deepened the shame he had been taught to carry. And despite his fame, he never fully escaped that pain. As the talkies took over and newer faces appeared on the scene, Ramon's star began to fade. Hollywood, so quick to elevate, was even quicker to erase. Roles dwindled, interviews stopped, and Ramon, once a global icon, was relegated to the background, known more for who he used to be than who he was becoming. Then came the tragedy. In 1968, Ramon Novarro was found dead in his Los Angeles home. The official story: a robbery gone wrong, but the queer community whispered the deeper truth. He had been murdered by two young men he met through an escort service. The media devoured the scandal, but what they didn't say outright, what they couldn't say in polite society, was this: Ramon died not just because of a robbery. He died because he was a gay man in a world that never made space for his full humanity. He was 69 years old. Today, his name barely appears in Hollywood retrospectives. His face is rarely shown among the legends. But for those who know the history, the real history, Ramon Novarro stands as both a warning and a wonder. A man who conquered the world's biggest stage while being forced to hide in its darkest wings. A man who made millions fall in love with him, even though he wasn't allowed to love freely himself. He deserved better. And now he deserves to be remembered. Drop a 1 if Ramon's story moved you. And if you believe forgotten icons like him deserve the spotlight, now more than ever. Sal Mineo, the teen idol. Hollywood left behind. He was young, he was beautiful, and for a moment, he was everywhere. Sal Mineo rose to fame like a spark catching fire. In 1955, at just 16 years old, he starred alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, a film that captured the angst of a generation. But it was Sal's portrayal of Plato, the sensitive, troubled teen with an unspoken crush on Dean's character, that truly broke hearts. He was nominated for an Academy Award. Tabloids called him the next big thing. Fan clubs exploded. And yet, beneath all that noise, Sal was hiding in plain sight. Because Plato wasn't just a role. In many ways, it was a reflection. Sal was gay. Or at least that's what everyone around him knew, though he never had the space to say it publicly. In the 1950s America, queerness was a career killer. Studios quickly tried to reshape his image. They cast him as a ladies' man. They buried any storyline that leaned too close to the truth. And when the teen idol glow faded, Hollywood did what it always does. It moved on. By the time he hit his 20s, roles had dried up. Offers became scarce. Directors stopped calling. He wasn't bankable anymore. Not because he lacked talent, but because he no longer fit the fantasy. But Sal didn't give up. He moved to theater. He wrote scripts. He fought to direct and star in projects that meant something, often with queer themes that mirrored his own story. For the first time, he began to live openly with a male partner, quietly but truthfully. And in his 30s, after years in the shadows, his career was finally beginning to flicker back to life. Then, everything stopped. On the night of February 12, 1976, Sal Mineo was stabbed to death in the alley behind his Los Angeles apartment. He was just 37. The media rushed to cover the tragedy. Most ignored who he was living with. Few mentioned that he had been cast in a new role just weeks earlier, a sign of his long-awaited comeback. Even fewer called it what it felt like: a queer man's life cut short just as he was starting to shine on his own terms. Today, Sal Mineo is often remembered as the third name in a movie headlined by James Dean and Natalie Wood. But he was so much more than that. He was a pioneer, one of the first young male actors to bring queer-coded emotion to the screen with sincerity. He was a survivor of an industry that adored him when he was silent and discarded him when he spoke. And he was proof that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in Hollywood is tell the truth. Drop a candle emoji if Sal Mineo's story broke your heart, and if you believe he should have had the chance to be more than just a footnote. Rock Hudson, the lie Hollywood made him live. He was the American dream. Tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome, Rock Hudson wasn't just a leading man, he was the leading man. From the 1950s to the early 70s, he starred in romantic dramas and screwball comedies that painted him as the perfect husband, the man every woman wanted to marry. Off-screen, he was quiet, gracious, a little shy, and living a lie so heavy it nearly crushed him. Rock Hudson was gay, but in the world he lived in, that truth was more dangerous than any scandal. Hollywood had built him into an icon of heterosexual masculinity. There was no room for the real man underneath the tuxedo. The studio managed everything: his dates, his public image, even his social life. Rumors swirled, but his charm and the Iron Curtain of 1950s PR buried them quickly. He even entered a short-lived marriage to his agent's secretary, more for headlines than love. Behind the scenes, Rock lived a double life. Private parties, carefully guarded friendships, relationships hidden behind locked doors. Those close to him knew. But the public never saw the cost of the performance. As he aged, roles became fewer. He turned to television. He carried the weight of secrecy with grace, but also with growing pain. Then came the moment that shattered everything. In 1985, Rock Hudson appeared on camera looking gaunt, exhausted, almost unrecognizable. Just weeks later, he announced to the world that he was dying of AIDS. It was a shockwave. Until that moment, many Americans still viewed AIDS as a distant disease, something that didn't touch mainstream lives. But Rock was mainstream. He was Hollywood. And now he was dying in front of the world. His confession was brave, but it wasn't celebrated. The media went into a frenzy. Some turned cruel. Politicians avoided the subject. Former co-stars distanced themselves. But for the queer community, it was a turning point. Suddenly, AIDS had a face, a name, a legacy too big to ignore. Rock Hudson passed away on October 2nd, 1985. He was 59. He never got to live openly, never got to love out loud, never got to be more than the mask Hollywood made for him. But in his final act, by telling the truth, by being vulnerable, he changed the world. His death fueled awareness, funding, research, empathy. In some ways, Rock did more for queer visibility in death than he was ever allowed to do in life. But we shouldn't have had to lose him to learn that lesson. Drop a 1 if Rock Hudson's story still haunts you, and if you believe no one should have to die to be allowed to live honestly. James Whale, the genius behind the monster. When you think of Frankenstein, you picture the bolts, the shadows, the lightning, the monster. But what if the real story was about the man behind the camera? James Whale was a visionary, an openly gay English director who came to Hollywood in the 1920s and refused to hide who he was. At a time when queerness was buried beneath studio contracts and whispered behind closed doors, Whale stood out with style, intellect, and unapologetic wit. He wasn't just talented, he was revolutionary. In 1931, he directed Frankenstein, a low-budget horror film that no one expected to succeed. Instead, it became a cultural earthquake. Whale redefined horror as art. He gave the monster depth, pain, and humanity. Some say it was a metaphor for his own life, a misunderstood outsider, judged by appearance, feared for simply existing. But he didn't stop there. In the following years, he directed The Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein. films now considered masterpieces. What set them apart wasn't just the effects or thrills, it was the soul. Whale injected his work with dark humor, tragic longing, and subtext that queered the screen without needing to say a word. Audiences adored his films, critics praised him, and yet, the moment he was no longer useful to the studios, they dropped him. As the 1940s approached, James Whale found himself locked out of the system he helped elevate. Some say it was because his style had grown too bold. Others say it was because he refused to stay quiet about being gay. Hollywood, as always, loves its monsters, but only when it controls the story. Whale returned to painting. He traveled. He withdrew. Behind the gates of his home, he lived a quiet life, one far removed from the chaos of the industry. But inside, he battled with depression and the echoes of everything he'd lost. In 1957, James Whale took his own life by drowning in his backyard pool. He left a note that was never made public until years later. It read, in part, "The future is just old age and illness and pain. I must have peace." He was 67. For decades, his name was mentioned only in footnotes, if at all. Horror historians remembered him. Queer film scholars revered him. But the industry that once basked in his brilliance had long since moved on. Only in recent years has Whale begun to reclaim his place in cinema history, not just as a director of monsters, but as a man who dared to be different and paid the price for it. His legacy lives on in every outsider story, every tragic hero, every shadowed frame that asks, "Who's the real monster here?" Drop a 1 if James Whale's courage and creativity deserve to be remembered louder, longer, and with the respect he never got in his time. They weren't forgotten because they lacked talent. They were forgotten because the world wasn't ready to remember them with honesty. But now, we are. Their stories aren't just part of queer history. They're part of film history, human history. And as long as we keep saying their names, they'll never fade again. Drop A if any of these men moved you. Tell us in the comments, whose story hit you the hardest? And who do you think we should remember next? And if you want more untold truths, early access, and content too real for the algorithm, join our Rainbow Spotlight members today. Together, we're rewriting history, one name at a time.